Hi, my name's Anne-Marie and I'm an information security consultant with Digital Logic Solutions. And today, in this video, I'm going to talk to you about how to answer interview questions for an information security interview. There's two basic types of interview questions. The first one deals with facts, so asking you questions about your resume or your past experience that require kind of definite answers. Or asking you knowledge type questions to verify that you have the knowledge that is needed to do the job. The second type of interview question, which is much more effective for determining successful candidates, is called behavioral type questions. And we're going to talk about those more in depth today. So behavioral questions have various different names for how they can be answered. And I'm familiar with the SAR approach. So SAR stands for situation, action, and result. But it's also called STAR and SORA. So if you're doing research on the internet for behavioral type questions, you might want to search on those terms also. This video is going to deal with how to answer SAR type questions, and we're going to run through a sample interview question to demonstrate how to do this. So S stands for situation, and in the situation part of the question, you want to set the scene for the person who's interviewing you. So the scene should be factual. It's not something that you made up to answer a hypothetical question. This is something real that happened to you and that you remember well. So describe the scene in generalities. Remember, you probably have a non-disclosure agreement with your past employer, and you don't want to overshare. Okay, so I wouldn't include any specifics about technologies or any of the security holes that you found in your previous employer's environment. So remember to talk in generalities and don't give too many details away. Okay, now I'm going to pretend to be an interviewer asking a question. Anne-Marie, I want you to think of a time when you had to deliver a failing security report to your client. What did you do and what was the outcome? Yeah, I can think of a time when I had to deliver a failing report. I was working as a QSA for I was doing PCI assessments and working as a QSA, and I had a client who was a large level 1 merchant. And it became clear early on in the assessment that this client was not going to pass their PCI assessment. They had several large gaps, and normally what we would do is allow them time to remediate their gaps and then come back and reassess. But in this case, we decided to finish the report on compliance for the customer and show the non-compliant status. Next, A stands for action. And in this part of the question, you're going to describe what you did to affect the outcome. Okay, what were the specific actions you took? What did you do to try and resolve the conflict? And why? Why did you do what you do? Because we knew that we were starting with a non-compliant ROC, we checked and verified with the client that they would like us to continue. In the end, we decided to carry out all the testing procedures as if it was a compliant ROC, and we documented everything that was found to be in place according to the ROC template format. And in fact, we even passed the report through our QA process to make sure that it was a high enough quality to share with the client and share with the acquirer. We documented the controls that were not in place, and we captured the management's response for their remediation plans. The last part is the result. And this is where you get to say whether what the actions you took led to a successful conclusion or not, and hopefully it was successful. So in the result, it's important to think of who the stakeholders are for the actions that you took and how did they feel about the outcome. Okay, so was it successful to you? Was it successful to your employer, to your client, or any other external stakeholders? And then look for what were the other indicators of success. Did you get that success because you received positive feedback, or did you have return business from the client? The client agreed completely with the results of the assessment and they accepted the report. I felt like my client needed a report that was a failing report in order to get the funding that he needed to address the security gaps in the organization. So my client was actually quite pleased to have the report. I know that my client also shared the report with the acquirer, and I had some positive feedback that the acquirer was satisfied and was very happy with the level of detail that went into the report, as it gave an accurate picture of what was compliant and where the gaps are that needed to be remediated. And lastly, we continued to work with the client, and they signed us on for the following year to come back and assess their environment. So overall, I felt even though we delivered a failing report to the client, it was a successful client engagement. Now I'm going to share with you 5 tips to help you with answering behavioral type questions. Tip number 1, keep it real. Make sure that you're talking about situations that you have from your own personal experience. There's no harm in confessing that you haven't had an experience, and if that's the case, move on to the next question. There's nothing wrong with that. I'd say be careful of answering questions that are posed by hypothetically. So an example would be if you were asked the question, what would you do if you had to deliver a failing penetration test report? What would you do if your employer gave you negative feedback? The best thing to do if you're asked a hypothetical question is answer it based on your own personal experience if it has happened to you. My second tip is to answer behavioral questions using the SAR approach as much as possible. It's tricky sometimes to determine if the question really is a behavioral question, but you'll find with some practice you'll get the hang of this. Thirdly, don't overshare. Remember that you have a confidentiality agreement or a non-disclosure agreement with your previous employer. If you overshare too many details about your past employment history, that might end up reflecting poorly on you in this interview. So it's important, don't share names, keep the names, the business names, the technologies, and the security gaps. You want to keep that information to yourself. And similarly, if you're bringing something to the interview, make sure that you're either bringing information that's publicly available or you've taken all the sensitive information out and in a redacted version of the report. My fourth tip, go download a sample of questions and work through them. And lastly, the most important tip of all, my fifth tip, is to practice, practice, practice. There's various ways you can practice. You can grab a friend or a spouse or a roommate and you can ask them to ask you interview questions, and you can practice responding and get their feedback. Did you respond well? Were you nervous? And the other thing you can do is grab a camcorder or grab your camera and videotape yourself answering interview questions. And you'll learn a lot by playing videos of yourself back. I hope you found this advice for how to answer interview questions helpful. There's notes in the show notes below and some links to documents and websites that have some sample interview questions that you can go and start practicing today. Good luck on your next interview, and thanks for watching.